Move to the back where you belong. First class isn't for people like you, no matter what that fake ticket says. The words sliced through the morning air at LAX Gate C7 like a blade loud enough for every passenger waiting to board SkyLink Airways Flight 1247 to hear. The man who spoke them, Richard Whitman, 52, stood in the narrow airplane aisle wearing a $1,000 charcoal suit and the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. His steel-gray eyes held no doubt, no hesitation, just the cold certainty of someone who had lived his entire life wrapped in invisible privilege. The target of his demand sat calmly in seat 1A. A black man in his late 40s wearing a simple navy blazer over dark jeans, his polished leather shoes reflecting the cabin lights. Jonathan Carter looked up from the Forbes magazine in his lap, blinking once slowly as if processing not just the words, but the audacity behind them. "This is seat 1A, Jonathan said quietly, his voice steady as stone. "I know," Richard replied, his smile holding no warmth whatsoever. "That's my seat. Not a request, but a command." A few first-class passengers glanced over their conversations, dying mid-sentence. The tension crackled through the recycled air like electricity before a storm. Jonathan's eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering there, though no anger showed. "Not yet." "Is your name Jonathan Carter?" he asked softly, holding up his boarding pass. Richard let out a short, dismissive laugh that carried the weight of decades of entitlement. "I'm Richard Whitman. I take this flight every month. 1A is always my seat. Has been for 15 years. Before we see how this $500 million mistake unfolds, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you've ever been told you don't belong somewhere, hit that subscribe button because this story is about to blow your mind." In that instant, something cold and familiar tightened in Jonathan's chest. Not because of the words, but because of memory. The day he was 12. The day someone told his best friend Kevin that seat isn't for people like you. He hadn't even formed a response when a bright female voice cut through the tension. "Is everything all right here?" Sophia Martinez, Hunter 29. The lead flight attendant approached with a perfectly practiced smile stretched across her face like plastic wrap. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform crisp and spotless, her manner professionally pleasant in the way that service workers perfect to survive. Richard pointed at Jonathan as if pointing at an object placed in the wrong spot. "He's sitting in my seat." Sophia glanced at her tablet, her fingers dancing across the screen. Her expression paused for a fraction of a second when she saw Jonathan's name clearly assigned to seat 1A. For one brief moment, her eyes flickered with hesitation like someone standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing they're about to jump, but not quite sure how deep the water below might be. Then she looked up, the smile returning wider now, more forced. "Mr. Carter, would you be able to move to Premium Plus for us, just to help things go a little smoother today, smoother?" The word hooked into Jonathan's ear like a barb. Each letter seemed to carry weight, the weight of every compromise every time he'd been asked to make things easier for everyone else's comfort. "Is something wrong with my ticket?" he asked, his voice still calm, still controlled, but something sharp glinting underneath. "No, sir, it's just that—" Sophia swallowed hard, her professional mask slipping for just a moment. "Mr. Whitman has been a loyal customer for many years. This would really help us out." The other first-class passengers kept up their elaborate act of being busy, suddenly fascinated by their phones and magazines, but their ears were stretched tight, catching every word. A few eyes held sympathy, but not enough for anyone to speak. Not enough for anyone to act. From seat 3C, Elena Rodriguez, 34. An immigration lawyer with sharp eyes and sharper instincts had already pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over the record button as she watched the scene unfold, every nerve in her body telling her this was about to become something bigger than a simple seating dispute. In seat 2B, David Clark, 41, shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair, his business magazine forgotten in his lap. He'd seen this before, this careful dance of discrimination dressed up as customer service, and it made his stomach turn every single time. And in seat 1C, Miranda Jones, 38, a travel blogger with 150,000 followers across social media, felt her journalist instincts awakening. This wasn't just a story. This was the story. Jonathan inhaled slowly, deeply, like a man preparing to dive into very deep water. He looked at Sophia for a long moment, and for that moment, she felt seen through, as if he could read every layer beneath her polite expression, every compromise she'd made, every time she'd chosen the easy path over the right one. Then he stood up. No complaint, no raised voice, no dramatic gesture. His silence rang louder than any outburst could have. It filled the cabin like smoke, thick and suffocating, making everyone suddenly aware that they were witnessing something that would matter, something they'd remember for the rest of their lives. Richard shifted aside the corner of his mouth, lifting as though he had just witnessed the world return to its proper order, the natural balance of things restored by his simple act of will. Jonathan lifted his carry-on suitcase from the overhead bin with deliberate care, every movement controlled and precise. As he walked down the aisle toward Premium Plus, each step made the air feel heavier, more charged, like the atmosphere before lightning strikes. Elena's finger finally pressed record. Richard settled into seat 1A like a king claiming his throne, spreading his arms across the armrests with theatrical satisfaction. He pulled out his phone immediately and snapped a selfie, the flash illuminating his smug grin as he typed a caption that would haunt him for years to come. Finally got my usual seat back. Some people need to learn their place. Number first, class life. Number, know your place. I don't understand why airlines even sell these premium seats to people who obviously can't afford them regularly, he said loudly enough for half the cabin to hear his voice carrying that particular tone of authority that comes from never having it questioned. It just creates confusion and delays for the rest of us. Sophia nodded along her smile, becoming more strained with each word, but still nodding, still agreeing, still choosing the path of least resistance. Of course, Mr. Whitman. We really appreciate your understanding of our situation. From her seat, Elena watched Richard's performance with growing disgust. She'd spent years fighting discrimination cases, had seen this exact scenario play out in courtrooms and conference rooms across the country. The casual cruelty of it, the way it was dressed up as policy and procedure, made her blood boil. She opened Instagram and went live. This is Elena Rodriguez, and I'm currently on SkyLink Airways Flight 1047, where I just witnessed something that's going to make your blood boil, she whispered into her phone, angling the camera to catch Richard's continued celebration. A paying first-class passenger just got forced to give up his seat because this entitled man demanded it, and the flight attendant went along with it. Comments started flooding in immediately. Are you serious right now? This is 2024, not 1954. Get their names, record everything. Miranda Jones had seen enough. She pulled up TikTok and started her own recording. Hey everyone! Miranda here with some breaking news that's happening literally right now. We're about to witness SkyLink Airways allowing blatant discrimination in first class, and I'm going to document every second of it. Her finger hit the Go Live button, and within minutes, her audience began to grow. 50 viewers became 100, then 500, then 1,000, all watching in real time as a corporation chose comfort over courage. David Clark finally found his voice. "Excuse me," he said loud enough to cut through Richard's continued commentary. "This isn't right. That gentleman's ticket clearly said Seat 1A. I saw it myself." Richard turned toward him with the kind of look usually reserved for small children who've interrupted adult conversation. "Mind your own business, friend. This doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us." David shot back, his voice gaining strength. "We all paid good money for our seats. What happens when someone decides they want mine next?" "That's different." Richard said with a wave of his hand. Some people belong here, others don't. It's not complicated. The words hung in the air like poison gas, contaminating everything they touched. Even Sophia seemed to flinch at their naked honesty, the way they stripped away all pretense and revealed the ugly truth underneath. Meanwhile, in Premium Plus, Jonathan sat in seat 4D, his hands folded carefully in his lap, his expression unreadable. The seat was smaller than what he'd paid for the fabric worn and slightly stained, the overhead light flickering intermittently. Through the thin partition, he could hear Richard's voice, clearly every word designed to cut, to remind him of his supposed place in the world. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a contact labeled Sarah Mitchell, assistant. His thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment, a moment that would change everything. Then he pressed it. Jonathan Sarah's voice came through clear and concerned. Aren't you supposed to be on a plane right now? I am on a plane, Sarah. Listen carefully. I need you to cancel the SkyLink deal. All of it. Silence. Then, sir, that's $500 million. The contracts are ready to sign. Are you absolutely certain? Never been more certain of anything in my life. Can you tell me what happened? Jonathan looked around the cramped Premium Plus section, watching as other passengers studiously avoided eye contact as if discrimination might be contagious. I'll explain everything when I land. Just kill the deal. Consider it done. As Jonathan ended the call, Carlos Rivera, the gate agent who'd been watching from the jet bridge, finally worked up the courage to approach Sophia. He'd been with SkyLink for 12 years, had seen plenty of difficult passengers and complicated situations, but something about this felt different. Dangerous. Sophia, he whispered urgently, pulling her aside. Do you know who that man is? The one you moved? Sophia's expression remained fixed in its professional mask. I don't care if he's the Pope, Carlos. Rules are rules. Mr. Whitman has seniority. That's not how seniority works, and you know it. Assigned seats are assigned seats. Look. Sophia snapped, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I've got 15 years with this airline. I know how to keep important customers happy. That's how you build loyalty. That's how you keep your job. Carlos shook his head slowly. I think you just made the biggest mistake of your career. Back in first class, Elena's live stream had reached 2,000 viewers. The comments section exploding with outrage and disbelief. She turned the camera on herself, her voice tight with controlled anger. For those just joining, we're watching SkyLink Airways actively participating in discrimination. The gentleman who was forced to move has been nothing but polite and dignified, while this other passenger... She angled the camera toward Richard, who was now loudly ordering champagne, is celebrating like he just won some kind of victory. Miranda's TikTok had gained even more traction, her follower count climbing as viewers shared the stream across platforms. Number SkyLink shame started trending in Los Angeles, then California, then nationwide. Richard, oblivious to the digital firestorm building around him, raised his champagne glass in a mock toast. To proper seating arrangements, he announced loudly, and to knowing one's place in the world. The cabin fell silent except for the hum of engines and the rapid clicking of phones recording what would become one of the most expensive toasts in corporate history, in Premium Plus. Jonathan closed his eyes and thought about Kevin Washington, his best friend who never got to grow up, never got to see what the world could become when someone finally decided to fight back. Today, finally, someone was going to fight back. The memory hit Jonathan like a physical blow, sudden and devastating, pulling him back 35 years to another airline gate, another moment when the world showed its true face to a 12-year-old boy who still believed in fairness. Detroit Metropolitan Airport, 1988. Jonathan Carter and Kevin Washington, both 12, both dressed in their Sunday best. Clean white shirts, pressed slacks, shoes polished until they gleamed. They stood at gate B14 clutching their boarding passes like golden tickets, because that's exactly what they were. Kevin had worked for 8 months, saving every penny from his paper route, collecting bottles for deposits, doing odd jobs around the neighborhood. $400. It had taken him 8 months to save $400 so he and Jonathan could fly to Chicago for his grandmother's 80th birthday. His beloved Grandma Rose, who'd raised him after his parents died, who'd taught him that respect was earned through character, not color. First class, Kevin had whispered to Jonathan, his eyes bright with excitement. Can you believe it? We're really flying first class. The gate agent, a middle-aged white woman with steel-gray hair and steel-gray eyes, looked at their tickets with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for counterfeit money. She examined them under the light, held them up to check the printing, scrutinized every detail, as if she expected to find evidence of fraud. These seats aren't for your kind, she'd said finally, her voice matter-of-fact, businesslike. You boys need to learn to read the signs. Young Kevin's face had crumpled, not with anger, but with confusion. Ma'am, we saved up. We bought them fair and square. Don't argue with me, boy. These are clearly mistakes. Administrative errors. She'd torn the tickets in half with deliberate ceremony, the ripping sound echoing through the gate area like a judge's gavel. You can take the bus. Jonathan had stood there frozen, watching his best friend's dreams literally torn apart, watching the light die in Kevin's eyes. He'd wanted to say something to fight back, to demand justice. But he was 12, and 12-year-olds don't fight airline gate agents. 12-year-olds learn to swallow their rage and carry it with them for the rest of their lives. Kevin never made it to Chicago. Never saw Grandma Rose one last time. 3 weeks later, walking home from school, he was struck by a drunk driver who ran a red light. Died instantly, the police said. Didn't suffer, they said, but Jonathan knew better. Kevin had been suffering since the moment those tickets were torn up. Had been carrying the weight of a world that saw him as less than, as other than, as not quite deserving of the same basic dignity afforded to everyone else. At the funeral, standing in the rain beside a grave that should have remained empty for another 70 years, Jonathan had made a promise to his best friend's memory. Someday, Kevin, I'm going to make sure this never happens to anyone else. Someday, I'm going to have enough power to change things. Now, sitting in seat 4D of Premium Plus, 35 years older, but still carrying that same rage, that same sense of injustice, Jonathan touched the photo in his wallet. Kevin at 11, gap-toothed grin, baseball cap, slightly crooked arm slung around Jonathan's shoulders at Belle Isle Park. The last picture they'd ever taken together. Not this time, he whispered to the photo. Not anymore. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. SkyLink executives are calling the office. Stock price dropping. What should I tell them? Jonathan typed back. Tell them they made their choice when their employee decided my humanity was negotiable. Tell them some things cost more than money. He opened his laptop and began typing an email to his legal team. His fingers moving with the precision of someone who'd built a $2.8 billion empire from nothing but determination and the refusal to accept no as a final answer. Robert, he wrote to his chief counsel, I need you to prepare documentation on everything we know about SkyLink Airways, employee training protocols, discrimination policies, customer service guidelines. I want to know how they justify what just happened to me, and I want to know it by the time we land. As he typed, Jonathan thought about the journey that had brought him here. The scholarship to MIT that he'd earned with perfect grades, and the determination to prove that Kevin's death meant something. The startup companies he'd built and sold in his 20s. The acquisition strategies that had made him one of the most successful corporate raiders in the country. Nova Meridian Holdings. His empire. Built on the simple principle that struggling companies could be transformed, that failing institutions could be saved, that broken things could be made whole again with enough vision and enough capital. He'd been planning to acquire SkyLink Airways for 18 months, had done the due diligence, had met with their executives over expensive dinners and golf course conversations. They'd courted him, wooed him, promised him that his investment would transform their struggling airline into something special. They'd never imagined he'd be sitting in coach experiencing their customer service firsthand. His phone rang. Sarah again. "Jonathan, I'm getting calls from everywhere. SkyLink's board, their investors, their CEO. They're panicking. Let them panic. They're offering to meet you at JFK. A full apology. Immediate policy changes, whatever you want." Sarah, "Do you know why I started Nova Meridian? To build something better. To build something fair. To create companies where worth is measured by character, not color. Where 12-year-old boys don't get their dreams torn up by people who think they know who belongs and who doesn't." "I understand." "No, Sarah. I don't think you do. This isn't about business anymore. This isn't about deals or profits or market share. This is about Kevin Washington, who never got to see his grandmother one last time because someone decided he didn't belong in first class. This is about every person who's ever been told to know their place." Silence on the other end. "Then, what do you need me to do?" "Prepare the press release. The real one. The one that explains exactly what happened here today, and exactly why Nova Meridian will never do business with companies that treat human dignity as optional." As Jonathan ended the call, he looked around the Premium Plus section one more time. At the worn seats and flickering lights, and the careful way other passengers avoided eye contact. At the institutional acceptance of not quite good enough that pervaded every inch of the space. Tomorrow this would all be different. Tomorrow the world would know that some lines should never be crossed, that some prices are too high to pay, that some victories are not worth the cost of your soul. But first, he had to get through the next 3 hours listening to Richard Whitman celebrate his conquest, knowing that the celebration was about to become very, very expensive. Jonathan's laptop screen glowed in the dim cabin light, displaying a Bloomberg article with his photo prominently featured. Nova Meridian CEO, Jonathan Carter, closes third major acquisition this quarter. The headline was visible to anyone who cared to look, but the passengers around him were carefully studying their own devices, maintaining the kind of studied indifference that allowed uncomfortable situations to continue unchallenged. His business card, embossed with simple black lettering on cream-colored stock, lay on the tray table. J. Carter, CEO, Nova Meridian Holdings. No flashy logos, no unnecessary decoration, just facts clean and undeniable. From the Premium Plus galley, Carlos Rivera watched with growing unease. He'd been running back and forth between sections, had glimpsed the laptop screen, had caught sight of the business card. Something familiar nagged at him, something from the business news he'd read during his morning coffee break. He approached Sophia with the urgency of someone trying to prevent a disaster. "Sophia, I really think you need to look into this passenger's background. Something doesn't feel right about this whole situation." Sophia was refilling champagne glasses in first class, her movements automatic, her smile permanent. "Carlos, I don't have time for your paranoia. Mr. Whitman is a Diamond Elite member. He knows what he's talking about. But what if he doesn't? What if we made a huge mistake?" "There's no mistake." Sophia snapped, her voice sharp with the irritation of someone who'd already committed to a course of action and refused to consider alternatives. "I've been doing this job for 8 years. I know how to handle difficult passengers." Meanwhile, Richard was holding court in first class, his voice carrying through the cabin like a master class in casual cruelty. "The problem with people today is they don't understand hierarchy. They think buying a ticket gives them rights." He gestured toward the back of the plane with his champagne flute. "Some people need to be reminded of their proper place in the social order." The businessman in seat 2A, David Clark, had heard enough. "Mr. Whitman, with respect, a ticket is exactly what gives someone rights. That's how commerce works. Commerce." Richard laughed, the sound harsh and dismissive. "This isn't about commerce. This is about understanding how the world actually works. Some people belong in certain spaces, others don't. It's not complicated. Elena's live stream was approaching 5,000 viewers. The comments section, a river of outrage flowing so fast she could barely read individual messages. The hashtag #SkyLinkShame was trending in 12 cities, now picked up by news aggregators and shared across every major social media platform. For those just joining, she whispered into her camera, "We're watching a masterclass in privilege and discrimination happening in real time. The passenger who was forced to move has been completely dignified throughout this entire ordeal, while this other gentleman continues to celebrate like he just won some kind of battle." Miranda's TikTok video had been shared by 3 verified accounts, including a civil rights attorney with 2 million followers who'd added the comment, "This is why we can't stop fighting. This is why the work continues." From his seat in Premium Plus, Jonathan watched the social media explosion with detached interest. He'd spent his entire career understanding the power of narrative, the way stories could shape markets and move mountains. This story was just beginning to find its voice. His phone buzzed with a text message from Robert Hayes. His chief counsel reviewed SkyLink's customer service protocols. No policy supporting seat reassignment based on passenger requests. This appears to be individual employee discrimination, which makes it legally actionable. Jonathan typed back, "Document everything. I want a complete timeline when I land." Another message arrived, this one from his daughter Jasmine at Stanford. "Dad, someone just sent me a TikTok video. Is that you on that plane? Are you okay?" He smiled, despite everything. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just watching the world change one seat at a time." Back in first class, Richard was taking another selfie, this one with Sophia in the background, serving him lunch. "Perfect service," he typed in his Instagram caption. "This is how airlines should treat their valued customers. Number excellence, number first class, number respect." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Carlos made one more attempt to reach Sophia. "I'm begging you to just check his name in the system. Jonathan Carter. Just run a quick search." "Carlos, stop. You're making me look unprofessional. I made the right call." "But what if you didn't?" Sophia turned to face him fully, her mask of professionalism slipping for just a moment to reveal the fear underneath. The fear of being wrong, of making a mistake that couldn't be undone, of discovering that she'd just committed career suicide at 30,000 feet. "I can't be wrong," she whispered. "I've got a mortgage. I've got student loans. I can't be wrong." But even as she said it, even as she tried to convince herself, a small voice in the back of her mind was asking the question she couldn't quite silence. What if Carlos was right? In Premium Plus, Jonathan closed his laptop and leaned back in his seat. His eyes closed, his breathing steady and calm. To anyone watching, he looked like he was napping. But inside, behind his closed eyes, he was remembering Kevin's face the day those tickets were torn up, remembering the promise he'd made at a graveside 35 years ago. The plane was flying at 35,000 feet, but the real altitude that mattered was the distance between who people thought he was and who he actually was. That distance was about to disappear completely. Premium Plus was a study in calculated mediocrity designed to make passengers feel grateful for upgrades while extracting maximum revenue from minimal comfort. Jonathan's seat 4D had a tear in the armrest that someone had covered with black electrical tape, and the overhead bin above his row refused to close completely, creating a persistent rattle that matched the rhythm of the engines. The overhead light flickered intermittently, casting shadows that danced across his laptop screen as he worked. Through the thin partition separating Premium Plus from First Class, Richard Whitman's laughter echoed like fingernails on a chalkboard. Each peal of amusement another reminder of the casual cruelty that had brought them to this moment. Tommy Garcia, a 24-year-old junior flight attendant with kind eyes and nervous hands, approached Jonathan's row with a beverage cart that had seen better decades. Unlike his colleagues in first class, Tommy moved with the hesitant energy of someone who knew something was deeply wrong but lacked the power to fix it. "Can I get you something to drink?" Sir Tommy asked quietly, his voice carrying genuine concern rather than professional obligation. "Water would be fine, thank you." Tommy poured the water into a plastic cup, his movements careful and respectful. "Sir," he said, leaning slightly closer, "I want you to know that what happened up there, that's not how we're supposed to do things. That's not who we're supposed to be." Jonathan looked up at the young man, seeing in his face the kind of moral clarity that gave him hope for the future. "What's your name, son?" "Tommy Garcia, sir." "Tommy, sometimes the most important thing is simply recognizing when something is wrong. You've already done more than most people by acknowledging that." Tommy nodded, his jaw set with determination. "This isn't over, is it?" "No, Tommy. This is just beginning." As Tommy moved on to serve other passengers, Jonathan returned his attention to his laptop, where emails were flooding in from his executive team. Sarah had already begun the delicate process of unwinding 18 months of negotiations, canceling meetings, and preparing legal documentation. The SkyLink acquisition, which would have been the crown jewel of Nova Meridian's transportation division, was being methodically dismantled with surgical precision. From first class, the sounds of celebration continued unabated. Richard's voice carried clearly through the partition, each word a masterclass in privilege and entitlement. The key to successful travel, Richard announced to his fellow first-class passengers, is understanding that standards exist for a reason. When you let standards slide, when you allow people to occupy spaces they haven't earned, everything falls apart. David Clark's voice cut through the self-congratulation. And who exactly gets to determine what someone has or hasn't earned? Experience. Success. The natural order of things. Look, I'm not trying to be harsh, but some people simply don't understand the etiquette of premium travel. They buy a ticket thinking it entitles them to the same treatment as long-term loyal customers. It doesn't work that way. Elena Rodriguez, still streaming live to an audience that had grown to over 8,000 viewers, captured every word. The comments section had become a river of outrage, with viewers sharing the stream across every platform imaginable. Number SkyLink shame was now trending in 47 cities, and major news outlets were beginning to take notice. "What you're witnessing," Elena whispered to her camera, "is a masterclass in how discrimination works in modern America. It's not burning crosses or angry mobs anymore. It's polite language corporate policies, and the casual assumption that some people simply matter more than others." Miranda Jones had switched to her professional camera equipment, the kind she normally reserved for travel documentaries. This was no longer just social media content. This was history in the making, and she knew it. "For my journalism followers," she said into her camera, "this is what institutional discrimination looks like. Notice how it's framed as customer service, as maintaining standards, as keeping things running smoothly. Notice how the victim is expected to accept the situation gracefully for everyone else's comfort." Meanwhile, Sofia Martinez was beginning to feel the weight of her decision in ways she hadn't anticipated. Carlos's repeated warnings had planted a seed of doubt that was growing with each passing minute. During her break, she'd tried to look up Jonathan Carter on her phone, but the airplane's Wi-Fi was frustratingly slow, yielding only partial search results that seemed to suggest he might be more significant than she'd assumed. But she couldn't back down now. 8 years with SkyLink Airways. 8 years of perfect performance reviews. 8 years of climbing the ladder, one rung at a time. She couldn't throw it all away because of one passenger complaint, no matter how dignified he'd been in his response. In row 7, Maria Santos, a 52-year-old teacher from Houston, watched the entire spectacle with growing disgust. She'd experienced her own share of discrimination over the years, had seen the way people's assumptions could shift based on her accent, her appearance, her last name. What was happening to Jonathan felt personal, felt like an attack on everyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong. "This is wrong," she said loudly enough for several rows to hear. That man paid for his seat just like everyone else. "Ma'am, please," Sophia said as she passed through the cabin, her professional smile strained to its breaking point. "We've resolved the situation. Everything is fine." "Everything is not fine," Maria shot back. "That gentleman was humiliated in front of a plane full of people because another passenger demanded his seat. How is that fine?" Other passengers began to murmur agreement. James Murphy, a 67-year-old veteran in row 8, spoke up with the authority of someone who'd spent his life fighting for principles. "I didn't serve 2 tours in Vietnam, so we could go backwards on civil rights. This is shameful." Linda Foster, traveling with her 8-year-old daughter, was trying to explain the situation in age-appropriate terms. Sometimes sweetheart adults make choices that hurt other people. What we're seeing right now is an adult making a very bad choice. But why, Mommy? The nice man wasn't doing anything wrong. No, baby, he wasn't. Sometimes bad things happen to good people, and it's up to all of us to speak up and make sure it doesn't keep happening. The conversation was being captured by multiple phones, multiple live streams, multiple angles that would eventually be compiled into a comprehensive record of corporate discrimination in action. Every word, every gesture, every moment of moral cowardice and occasional courage was being preserved for posterity. Richard, oblivious to the digital uprising happening around him, was crafting another social media post. "Flying first class with SkyLink today. Excellent service. Proper standards maintained. This is how aviation should work. Number customer service. Number excellence. Number know your place." The hashtag number know your place would haunt him for years to come, becoming a symbol of entitled cruelty that would follow him through every Google search, every background check, every attempt to rebuild his reputation. In Premium Plus, Jonathan received another text from his daughter, "Dad. This is going viral. Someone posted a video and it's everywhere. Are you safe?" He typed back. "Safer than I've ever been. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is underestimate someone based on how they look." As the plane continued its journey toward JFK, the passenger cabin had become a microcosm of America itself. Those who chose comfort over conscience, those who spoke up despite the cost, and those who simply watched and waited to see which side would ultimately prevail. But in seat 4D, Jonathan Carter was no longer just watching. He was preparing to show everyone exactly what happened when you told the wrong person that they didn't belong. The next 3 hours would redefine not just SkyLink Airways, but the entire industry's understanding of consequence and accountability. If this is making your blood boil, wait until you hear what happens next. Smash that like button if you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of how they look or dress. Captain Michael Torres had been flying commercial aircraft for 23 years, had navigated through hurricanes and mechanical failures and every variety of human drama that could unfold at 35,000 feet. But as he reviewed the passenger manifest during their cruise altitude, something made his blood run cold. Jonathan Carter. Seat 4D Premium Plus. The same Jonathan Carter whose acquisition negotiations he'd read about in Aviation Weekly just 2 months ago. The same Jonathan Carter whose Nova Meridian Holdings had been quietly reshaping the transportation industry for the past decade. The same Jonathan Carter who was supposed to be signing a $500 million deal with SkyLink Airways the moment this plane landed. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, reaching for the internal phone system. In the first-class galley, Sophia was reviewing meal service protocols when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Captain Torres, and her stomach dropped. Captains didn't call flight attendants during cruise unless something was very, very wrong. "Sophia, I need you to come to the cockpit immediately and bring the passenger manifest. Captain, is everything okay? Are we having mechanical issues? Just get up here. Now." Sophia made her way forward through first class where Richard was regaling his seatmates with stories about his real estate empire and the importance of maintaining proper social hierarchies. She knocked on the cockpit door. her hands already beginning to shake. Captain Torres didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Sophia, what the hell happened with passenger Jonathan Carter?" "Sir, there was a seating dispute in first class. I resolved it by moving Mr. Carter to Premium Plus as a courtesy upgrade. The situation is handled." "A courtesy upgrade?" Torres's voice rose to a level that made his co-pilot turn to stare. "Sophia, do you know who Jonathan Carter is?" "A passenger who was satisfied with our resolution." Torres pulled up a browser on his tablet and searched for Jonathan Carter Nova Meridian. The results filled the screen: Forbes articles, Financial Times profiles, CNBC interviews. A fortune estimated at $2.8 billion. A business empire built on acquiring and transforming struggling companies. Companies exactly like SkyLink Airways. "Sophia, this man is the CEO of Nova Meridian Holdings. He's in the middle of negotiations to acquire our entire airline. You just discriminated against our potential owner." The color drained from Sophia's face so completely that Torres thought she might faint. That's impossible. He was just a regular passenger. He didn't say anything about being important. Why would he need to? His ticket was valid. His seat was assigned. By what possible logic did you move him? Sophia's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Mr. Whitman is a Diamond Elite member. He requested the seat. I was trying to provide excellent customer service." Customer service. Torres was now shouting loud enough that passengers in first class could hear him through the reinforced door. "You provided customer service to someone who had no right to that seat by discriminating against someone who did. Do you have any idea what you've done?" In Premium Plus. Jonathan's laptop chimed with a new email from Sarah Mitchell. SkyLink stock dropping in after-hours trading. Rumors circulating about deal cancellation. Board requesting emergency meeting. "How do you want to proceed?" Jonathan typed back. "Let it drop. Sometimes the market is the most honest judge of corporate character." His phone rang immediately. Sarah's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Jonathan, I'm getting calls from everyone. SkyLink's CEO, their board chair, major investors. They want to know if the rumors are true." "The rumors are true, Sarah. Nova Meridian will not be acquiring SkyLink Airways." "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" Jonathan looked around the Premium Plus section at the worn seats and flickering lights and the careful way other passengers avoided eye contact. "I was told I didn't belong in first class, Sarah. On my own future airline, I was told I didn't belong." Silence on the other end. Then, oh my God. The discrimination wasn't subtle, wasn't hidden behind corporate doublespeak. It was direct public and witnessed by an entire cabin full of people who are currently broadcasting it to the world. "What do you need me to do?" "Prepare the press statement. The real one. I want every detail documented. I want the world to understand exactly what kind of corporate culture we would have been acquiring." As Jonathan ended the call, Sophia emerged from the cockpit looking like she'd seen her own ghost. Her face was pale, her hands visibly shaking, her professional composure completely shattered. She moved through first class like a sleepwalker past Richard, who was still holding court, past the witnesses who'd watched her make the worst decision of her professional life. She stopped at the partition between first class and Premium Plus, staring at the back of Jonathan's head as if seeing him for the first time. Then, gathering what remained of her courage, she approached his seat. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to speak with you." Jonathan looked up from his laptop, his expression calm and unreadable. "I think it's too late for private conversations, Ms. Martinez." "Sir, I realize. The captain informed me. I understand you're the CEO of Nova Meridian Holdings." "Yes." And you just discriminated against your future owner." The words hung in the air like a judge's verdict. Sophia's knees seemed to buckle slightly, and she gripped the seat back for support. "Mr. Carter, please, I can explain." Mr. Whitman said he was a long-time customer. "I thought I was providing good customer service by accommodating his request. Ms. Martinez, let me ask you something. If I had walked onto this plane wearing a $1,000 suit instead of jeans, if I had introduced myself as the CEO of Nova Meridian Holdings, would you have moved me to accommodate Mr. Whitman's request?" Sophia opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again, realizing that any honest response would only make things worse. "The answer is no," Jonathan continued calmly. "Which means your customer service standards are based not on valid tickets or assigned seats, but on your personal assessment of who deserves respect and who doesn't." Richard Whitman. Hearing raised voices, turned in his seat to see what was happening. When he caught sight of Sophia talking intensely with Jonathan, curiosity got the better of him, and he unbuckled his seatbelt to investigate. "Is there a problem here?" Richard asked, his voice carrying the automatic authority of someone accustomed to inserting himself into situations. Jonathan looked up at the man who'd started this entire chain of events. "Mr. Whitman, I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Jonathan Carter, CEO of Nova Meridian Holdings." Richard's expression shifted from confusion to dismissive laughter. "Nova Meridian. That's impossible. You're just trying to get attention because you're upset about the seating situation." Jonathan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to Richard with the same calm precision he'd used to sign a contract. Richard took the card, his eyes scanning the embossed lettering, his brain trying to process information that didn't match his preconceived notions. "This is fake," he said finally. "Anyone can print business cards." Jonathan pulled out his phone and opened his contacts, scrolling to a number labeled SkyLink Airways board chair. He hit the call button and put the phone on speaker. Jonathan came a voice from the speaker, desperate and panicked. "Thank God you're calling. Please tell me we can resolve this situation. The board is in emergency session. Our stock price is in freefall." "Hello, William," Jonathan said calmly. "I'm currently sitting in seat 4D of your Premium Plus section, having been moved from my assigned first-class seat to accommodate another passenger who felt I didn't belong there. Jonathan, please, whatever happened, we can fix it. Full refund. Lifetime first-class status, whatever you want. I want your airline to treat all passengers with equal dignity, William. Apparently, that's too much to ask." Richard's face had gone completely white, the business card trembling in his hands as the full weight of his actions began to register. Around them, other passengers were pulling out their phones, recording every moment of what would become legendary corporate reckoning. Elena's livestream audience had exploded to over 15,000 viewers, the comments section moving so fast it was unreadable. Miranda's professional documentation was capturing every angle, every expression, every moment of a $500 million mistake unfolding in real time. "Mr. Carter." Richard stammered, his voice stripped of all its previous authority. I didn't know. If I had known who you were." Jonathan's response cut through the cabin like a blade. "So my worth as a human being depends on my net worth. Mr. Whitman, my right to occupy a seat I paid for depends on your approval of my importance." The question hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable, as the plane continued its journey toward the most expensive landing in aviation history. Did you see that coming? If you're as shocked as those passengers, subscribe now because we're just getting started. Within minutes of Richard's realization spreading through the cabin, the airplane transformed into something resembling a newsroom during a breaking story. Passengers who had been studiously avoiding the situation were now openly recording live streaming and furiously typing on their phones as the magnitude of what they'd witnessed began to sink in. Jonathan's phone rang again, the caller ID showing Alexandra Patel, CEO, SkyLink Airways. He answered on speaker, his voice calm and controlled despite the chaos erupting around him. "Mr. Carter, this is Alexandra Patel. I cannot express how sorry I am about this situation. I'm sure there's been some kind of misunderstanding that we can resolve immediately." "Ms. Patel, there's no misunderstanding. Your employee made a conscious decision to move me from my assigned first-class seat to accommodate another passenger who felt I didn't belong there. It was witnessed by an entire cabin full of people who are currently broadcasting it to the world. Jonathan, please, we've had a partnership developing for 18 months. Surely we can work through this like the professionals we are." Jonathan looked around the Premium Plus section at the torn seat fabric and flickering lights, and the institutional acceptance of good enough that pervaded every inch of the space. Alexandra professionalism means treating all customers equally regardless of how they look or what you assume about their background. Your company failed that basic test. We can make this right. Full refund, lifetime platinum status, a formal apology. The time for making this right was when your employee decided my assigned seat was negotiable based on another passenger's preferences. Richard Whitman, meanwhile, was experiencing what could only be described as a complete psychological collapse. The business card lay in his lap, like evidence of a crime he'd unwittingly committed while around him phones captured every moment of his reckoning. "Mr. Carter," he began, his voice shaking, "I want you to know that I never intended. I didn't realize." "Mr. Whitman, what exactly didn't you realize? That black passengers have the same rights as white passengers? That valid tickets should be honored regardless of the skin color of the person holding them? No, that's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean when you told me to move to the back where I belong? What did you mean when you said first class isn't for people like me?" The questions came like precision strikes, each one forcing Richard to confront the ugly truth of his own words, his own assumptions, his own casual cruelty. Around them, passengers watched in fascination and horror as a man's entire worldview crumbled in real time. Sophia Martinez stood frozen in the aisle, her career imploding with each passing second. Her phone was buzzing with calls from SkyLink's Human Resources Department, messages from supervisors, texts from colleagues who were watching the drama unfold on social media. Tommy Garcia approached her with the kind of expression usually reserved for crime scenes. "Sophia HR wants to talk to you immediately. They're saying you've been suspended pending investigation." "Suspended?" Sophia's voice cracked with disbelief. "I was following customer service protocols. I was trying to keep an important passenger happy." "Which passenger?" Tommy asked pointedly. "The one with the valid ticket, or the one who demanded someone else's seat?" The distinction was devastating in its simplicity. Sophia had indeed been trying to keep an important passenger happy. She'd just chosen the wrong passenger. Elena Rodriguez's live stream had become the center of a digital hurricane, with major news outlets reaching out for permission to use her footage. Her phone was buzzing with calls from CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and every major network in between. "This is Elena Rodriguez reporting live from SkyLink Flight 1247, she said into her camera, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. What started as routine discrimination has become a $500 million corporate disaster, and we're witnessing every moment of it. Miranda Jones was coordinating with her editor at Travel and Leisure, preparing what would become the most read article in the magazine's history. The most expensive seat reassignment in aviation history, a first-person account. "This isn't just about one passenger or one flight," she said into her professional camera. "This is about the widespread cultural acceptance of discrimination when it's dressed up as customer service, when it's presented as maintaining standards, when it's framed as keeping things running smoothly." The social media explosion was unprecedented. Number SkyLink shame was trending in all 50 states and 12 countries. Number Richard Whitman racist had become a worldwide phenomenon. Videos of the incident were being shared faster than the platform algorithms could track them. On Richard's social media accounts, the comment sections had become digital war zones. His real estate company's Facebook page was flooded with one-star reviews and angry messages. His LinkedIn profile was being screenshot and shared as an example of corporate privilege gone wrong. "Mr. Carter," Richard tried again, desperation creeping into his voice. "Surely we can resolve this between gentlemen. I'm willing to make a substantial donation to any charity you choose." Jonathan's response was swift and devastating, "Mr. Whitman. You can't purchase your way out of showing the world who you really are. You can't donate away the fact that you publicly humiliated someone because you assumed they didn't deserve basic respect." Captain Torres's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're beginning our descent into JFK Airport. I want to personally apologize to all passengers for any disruption to your flight experience today." The apology was clearly directed at Jonathan, but it also served as an acknowledgement that something unprecedented had occurred on this flight, something that would have consequences far beyond the next few hours. Jonathan's phone buzzed with a text from his daughter, "Dad, you're trending on Twitter. The whole internet is talking about this. Are you okay?" He typed back, "I'm fine, sweetheart. Sometimes change happens one seat at a time." Another text arrived, this one from Robert Hayes, his legal counsel. "Jonathan, I've got 3 discrimination attorneys who want to represent other SkyLink passengers pro bono. This is becoming a class action lawsuit. Let them. Every passenger who's ever been mistreated by this airline deserves justice." As the plane began its descent, Sophia made one final attempt to salvage her career. "Mr. Carter, I want you to know that I'm not a racist person. I have friends of all backgrounds. I was just trying to do my job." Jonathan looked up at her with something that might have been pity. "Ms. Martinez, I don't doubt that you're a good person who made a bad choice, but impact matters more than intent. Your actions today will have consequences that extend far beyond this airplane, far beyond your employment with SkyLink Airways." "What kind of consequences?" "The kind that change industries. The kind that force corporations to examine their cultures and their training and their assumptions about who deserves dignity and who doesn't." Through the airplane windows, the lights of New York City began to appear, each one representing lives that would be affected by what had happened at 35,000 feet. The descent toward JFK was more than just a change in altitude. It was the beginning of a reckoning that would reshape the entire transportation industry. As the wheels touched down and the plane taxied toward the gate, Jonathan Carter wasn't just a passenger anymore. He was a catalyst, a force of change, a reminder that in America, actions still have consequences and dignity still matters. The most expensive flight in aviation history had finally landed. JFK Airport's Terminal 4 had been transformed into something resembling a major news event. Word of the incident had spread through social media with the speed and intensity of wildfire, reaching news outlets, civil rights organizations, and financial markets before Flight 147 had even begun its descent. At Gate C7, where passengers would normally deplane into relative anonymity, 53 reporters, photographers, and camera crews waited like hunters surrounding their prey. Airport security had cordoned off the area, creating a narrow corridor through which passengers would have to walk, ensuring that every moment would be captured and broadcast around the world. As the plane pulled up to the jet bridge, Captain Torres made a final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to JFK Airport. For the safety and comfort of all passengers, please remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop and the seatbelt sign has been turned off." But this was no ordinary landing. Through the airplane windows, passengers could see the media circus waiting for them, the forest of cameras and microphones and expectant faces that had gathered to witness the conclusion of a $500 million mistake. Jonathan Carter remained calm in his seat, reviewing emails from his legal team and PR department. Sarah Mitchell had prepared a brief statement for the media, but Jonathan knew that words alone wouldn't capture the significance of what had happened. Sometimes the most powerful statements were made through actions, through consequences, through the simple refusal to accept unacceptable behavior. Sofia Martinez sat in the galley, her head in her hands, her career effectively over before the plane had even reached the gate. HR had already informed her that she would be escorted off the aircraft by security pending a full investigation that everyone knew would result in termination. 8 years with SkyLink Airways. 8 years of perfect performance reviews destroyed by a single decision that revealed more about her character than she'd ever intended. Tommy Garcia stood beside her, his young face grave with the weight of witnessing institutional discrimination up close. Sophia, why didn't you just honor his ticket? Why did you choose to side with Mr. Whitman? I thought I was doing the right thing, Sophia whispered. Diamond Elite status, long-time customer satisfaction metrics. I thought I was following protocol. What protocol says to discriminate against paying passengers? Sophia had no answer because there was no answer. There was no SkyLink Airways policy that justified what she'd done. No training manual that taught employees to judge customers based on appearance. No corporate guideline that prioritized one passenger's preferences over another's valid ticket. Richard Whitman was experiencing his own reckoning in Seat 1A, the seat that had cost him everything. His phone had been buzzing continuously with calls from his real estate office, his clients, his business partners, all wanting to know if the viral videos showed him correctly. His assistant had already informed him that 3 major clients had canceled their contracts, citing concerns about corporate reputation and values. As the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers began to stand and gather their belongings. But this time, the usual rush toward the exit was replaced by a solemn procession, with everyone aware that they were part of something historic, something that would be studied and analyzed and remembered for years to come. Elena Rodriguez was coordinating with her legal contacts, preparing to file formal complaints with the Department of Transportation and the Federal Aviation Administration. Her live stream had reached over 30,000 viewers, creating an irrefutable record of discrimination that no corporate PR department could spin away. Miranda Jones was already writing her article in her head, the lead paragraph forming with crystal clarity. I witnessed the most expensive act of discrimination in aviation history, and it happened in the time it takes to say 11 words. Move to the back where you belong. First class isn't for people like you. Jonathan finally stood gathering his carry-on bag with deliberate care. As he moved toward the front of Premium Plus, passengers began to applaud. Not the perfunctory clapping that sometimes follows turbulent flights, but sustained, genuine applause that recognized courage, dignity, and the refusal to accept injustice. Maria Santos, the teacher from Houston, stood and began clapping first. "Thank you for standing up," she said as Jonathan passed her row. "Thank you for not letting them get away with it." James Murphy. The veteran saluted as Jonathan walked by. "That's how you serve your country, son. By making it better." Linda Foster's 8-year-old daughter asked her mother in a stage whisper that carried through the cabin, "Mommy, is that man a hero?" "Yes, sweetheart. That man is definitely a hero." As Jonathan reached the jet bridge, he was met by a wall of sound and light. Questions flew from every direction, Mr. Carter. How do you respond to SkyLink's discrimination? Will Nova Meridian still acquire the airline? What message does this send to corporate America? How does it feel to cost an airline $500 million? Jonathan raised his hand for quiet, and remarkably, the crowd of reporters fell silent. In the sudden stillness, his voice carried with perfect clarity. This isn't about money. This isn't about business deals or corporate acquisitions. This is about the fundamental principle that every human being deserves dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived status. He paused, letting the words sink in. Behind him, other passengers were emerging from the jet bridge, their faces reflecting the weight of what they'd witnessed. SkyLink Airways had a choice today. They could have honored my valid ticket, or they could have prioritized the demands of someone who felt I didn't belong in first class. They chose wrong. "What does this mean for the acquisition deal?" shouted a reporter from the Financial Times. "The acquisition is canceled. Nova Meridian will not be purchasing SkyLink Airways." When a company's culture allows discrimination to masquerade as customer service, when employees feel empowered to judge customers based on race rather than tickets, that company is not worthy of investment. Richard Whitman emerged from the jet bridge like a man walking to his execution. The moment he appeared, cameras swiveled toward him like weapons locking onto a target. He tried to shield his face, but there was nowhere to hide in the terminal's glass and steel architecture. "Mr. Whitman, any comment on your role in costing SkyLink $500 million? Do you regret your actions on the flight? What do you say to critics who call your behavior racist?" Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "This is all a misunderstanding," he finally managed to stammer. "I never intended for any of this to happen. But you did tell Mr. Carter to move to the back where he belongs, didn't you?" The video speaks for itself. Indeed it did. Elena's live stream footage was already being dissected by news analysts, civil rights attorneys, and social media users who were turning Richard Whitman into a case study of privilege entitlement and the cost of casual cruelty. Sophia Martinez was escorted through a side exit by airport security, avoiding the media circus, but not the consequences of her actions. By the time she reached the employee parking garage, SkyLink's official statement was already being read on CNN. SkyLink Airways does not tolerate discrimination in any form. The employee involved has been terminated, and we are conducting a full review of our policies and procedures. As Jonathan made his way through the terminal, passengers from the flight continued to approach him. Some wanted to shake his hand, others to apologize for not speaking up sooner, still others to share their own stories of discrimination and exclusion. A young black businessman stopped him near the baggage claim. "Mr. Carter, I just want to thank you. I've been in situations like that before where I was told I didn't belong somewhere I had every right to be. You did what I never had the courage to do." "Courage isn't about not being afraid," Jonathan replied. "Courage is about deciding that some things are more important than fear. Today, dignity was more important than a business deal." The impact was already rippling outward like stones thrown into still water. Within hours, other airlines were announcing reviews of their customer service policies. Civil rights organizations were preparing lawsuits. Corporate America was suddenly very interested in examining its own practices and assumptions. As Jonathan finally left the terminal, his phone buzzed with one final message of the day, this one from his daughter, Jasmine. "Dad, I've never been prouder to be your daughter. You changed the world today." He smiled, typing back, "No, sweetheart. Kevin Washington changed the world today. I just made sure his memory finally got the justice it deserved." The most expensive flight in aviation history was over, but its consequences were just beginning. The dominoes are falling. If you're loving this justice, hit that notification bell because the aftermath is going to be incredible. The first 72 hours after Flight 1247 landed at JFK Airport witnessed the fastest corporate implosion in modern aviation history. What began as a simple seating dispute had metastasized into a full-scale crisis that reached from Wall Street trading floors to congressional hearing rooms, from civil rights law firms to corporate boardrooms across America. By Monday morning, SkyLink Airways' stock price had plummeted 47% in after-hours trading, wiping out nearly $2 billion in market value. The trading floor at the New York Stock Exchange buzzed with rumors and speculation as financial analysts struggled to quantify the cost of discrimination in real-time market terms. "This is unprecedented," said Marcus Webb, a senior aviation analyst at Goldman Sachs, during a CNBC interview that aired while SkyLink's executives held emergency board meetings. "We've seen airlines face crises over safety, over service, over labor disputes. But this is the first time we've seen an airline lose a $500 million acquisition because they couldn't treat a passenger with basic human dignity. The media coverage was relentless and unforgiving. Every major news outlet led with the story, and social media platforms couldn't contain the flood of commentary analysis and outrage that poured forth from millions of users who saw their own experiences reflected in Jonathan's humiliation. SkyLink shame became more than a hashtag. It became a cultural phenomenon that spawned documentary filmmakers, academic researchers, and corporate consultants who specialized in crisis management. Richard Whitman racist evolved into a broader conversation about privilege entitlement and the casual cruelty that flourished in spaces where accountability was optional. Elena Rodriguez's live stream footage became the most watched video in social media history, shared across every platform and translated into dozens of languages. Major news networks paid substantial licensing fees for the right to broadcast her documentation of discrimination in real time, turning her into an overnight celebrity and a powerful voice for civil rights advocacy. Miranda Jones's first-person account for Travel and Leisure became the most read article in the magazine's 90-year history, spawning book deals and speaking engagements across the country. The Seat That Cost $500 Million was reprinted in textbooks, cited in legal briefs, and referenced in congressional hearings as an example of how individual actions can create massive consequences. Richard Whitman's real estate empire collapsed with breathtaking speed. Within a week, his development company had lost 60% of its clients. 3 major projects were canceled, and his business partners were scrambling to distance themselves from the toxic association with his name. The Richard Whitman Properties logo disappeared from billboards and advertisements across California, replaced by hastily designed rebranding efforts that fooled no one. His personal social media accounts became case studies in digital humiliation. LinkedIn removed his professional profile after it was flooded with comments calling him the $500 million racist. His Twitter account was suspended for coordinated harassment after thousands of users shared screenshots of his Know Your Place hashtag alongside video footage of his confrontation with Jonathan. The psychological toll was evident during his forced public apology, a hastily arranged press conference in the conference room of his Malibu office building. Standing behind a podium, with no corporate logos flanked by attorneys who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, Richard faced a room full of reporters who'd come to witness his professional execution. I want to publicly apologize to Mr. Jonathan Carter for my inappropriate behavior on SkyLink Flight 147. He read from a prepared statement, his voice shaking with each word. My actions were wrong, they were hurtful, and they do not reflect the values I was raised with or the man I strive to be. The questions came like artillery fire. Mr. Whitman, do you consider your actions racist? How do you respond to calls for a federal investigation? Will you be compensating Mr. Carter for the humiliation you caused? What do you say to other passengers who witnessed your behavior? Richard's responses were a masterclass in non-answers, legal disclaimers, and the kind of corporate speak that admits nothing while acknowledging everything. But the damage was irreversible, crystallized in the viral video that showed his moment of realization, his face going white as he understood the cost of his casual cruelty. Sofia Martinez's termination letter became a legal document studied by employment attorneys across the country. SkyLink Airways had moved with unprecedented speed to distance themselves from her decision, citing gross misconduct and violation of company anti-discrimination policies that ironically had never been properly enforced until they became a public relations nightmare. Her personal reckoning was both more private and more profound than Richard's public humiliation. Sitting in her studio apartment in Queens, surrounded by the detritus of a career that had evaporated in 3 hours, Sophia watched the news coverage with the numb fascination of someone observing their own funeral. The phone call from her mother was perhaps the most difficult conversation of her life. Sophia, mija, I saw the video. How could you do such a thing, Mama? I was trying to do my job. I thought I was providing good customer service. Good customer service means treating all people with respect, not choosing who deserves dignity based on how they look. Her 8-year-old nephew, during a family video call, asked the question that cut deepest Tia Sophia. Why did you hurt that nice man? She had no answer because there was no good answer. No way to explain to a child that adults sometimes make choices that reveal the ugly truths they carry inside themselves. Tommy Garcia found himself promoted to head flight attendant within 2 weeks, not because of seniority or experience, but because he had demonstrated the moral clarity that SkyLink desperately needed to rebuild its reputation. His first official act was to implement new training protocols that emphasized dignity, respect, and the simple principle that valid tickets should be honored regardless of the appearance of the person holding them. Meanwhile, the aviation industry as a whole was scrambling to avoid becoming the next SkyLink Airways. United Airlines announced a comprehensive review of all customer service policies with particular emphasis on seating disputes and passenger rights. Delta implemented mandatory bias training for all employees from gate agents to flight attendants to corporate executives. American Airlines went further, establishing an independent ombudsman office to investigate discrimination complaints and ensure that customer service decisions were based on policies rather than prejudices. Southwest Airlines, known for its casual culture, created formal protocols that specifically prohibited seat reassignments based on passenger demands rather than operational necessities. The Federal Aviation Administration, under pressure from congressional representatives and civil rights organizations, announced new regulations requiring airlines to document and report all passenger complaints related to discrimination. The Department of Transportation opened investigations into industry-wide practices that might enable or encourage discriminatory behavior. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural, rather than regulatory. The phrase SkyLink Airways moment entered the corporate lexicon as shorthand for the catastrophic consequences that could result from allowing discrimination to masquerade as customer service. Business schools began teaching case studies about Flight 1247, examining how individual employee decisions could destroy billions of dollars in corporate value. Jonathan Carter became an inadvertent spokesperson for dignity and justice, invited to speak at conferences and universities about the intersection of business ethics and civil rights. His speech at Harvard Business School drew overflow crowds and was later published as an essay titled The Economics of Dignity. Why respect is the most profitable business strategy. Discrimination is not just morally wrong, he told the Harvard audience. It's economically disastrous. When you treat customers as less than human, when you prioritize prejudice over policy, you're not just destroying individual dignity, you're destroying shareholder value, employee morale, and corporate reputation. You're building a culture of casual cruelty that will ultimately consume your entire organization. Nova Meridian Holdings, meanwhile, experienced a surge in both stock price and public reputation. Jonathan's refusal to compromise on principles had transformed him from a successful businessman into a moral leader, attracting investors who wanted to be associated with companies that stood for something beyond profit margins. The canceled SkyLink acquisition became the foundation for a new business strategy. Instead of acquiring troubled airlines, Nova Meridian would create partnerships with companies committed to dignity and respect, building a transportation network based on the radical idea that all customers deserved equal treatment. As the initial shockwaves began to settle, the long-term consequences of Flight 1247 continued to reverberate through American corporate culture. The incident had become more than just a story about airline discrimination. It had evolved into a defining moment that forced an entire society to confront the gap between its stated values and its actual behavior. The seat that Richard Whitman had demanded with such confidence had cost him everything: his business, his reputation, his place in a society that was finally beginning to hold people accountable for their actions. The $500 million that Jonathan Carter had refused to invest had become a symbol of the true cost of dignity, and the even higher cost of abandoning it. 6 months after Flight 1247 became the most expensive 3 hours in aviation history, Jonathan Carter stood in Oakland Hills Cemetery on a windswept Saturday morning holding a single white rose and a photograph that had been in his wallet for 35 years. The photograph showed two 12-year-old boys with gap-toothed grins and arms slung around each other's shoulders, frozen in a moment of innocent joy that preceded a lifetime of grief and determination. Kevin Washington's gravestone was simple granite weathered by decades of California seasons inscribed with dates that told the story of a life cut short, 1976 to 1988. Beloved son, cherished friend, forever missed. Jonathan knelt beside the grave, placing the rose against the stone with the careful reverence of someone performing a sacred ritual. "Kevin," he said quietly, his voice carrying on the morning breeze. "We did it, brother. Nobody else will go through what we went through. Nobody else will have their dreams torn up because someone decided they didn't belong." The establishment of the Kevin Washington Foundation had been announced the previous week, funded by a personal donation of $50 million from Jonathan's own fortune. The foundation's mission was simple but revolutionary: to provide full scholarships for underprivileged students pursuing careers in aviation hospitality and transportation, with particular focus on young people who might otherwise be told they didn't belong in those industries. The foundation's first scholarship recipients were 50 students from Kevin's old neighborhood in Detroit, young people whose backgrounds and circumstances mirrored those of the 12-year-old boy who had saved every penny to buy first-class tickets for his grandmother's birthday. The scholarship ceremony had been held at the same airport where Kevin's tickets were torn up, transforming a place of humiliation into a symbol of opportunity and hope. Reverend Thomas Wright, who had presided over Kevin's funeral 35 years earlier, was invited to speak at the scholarship ceremony. Now, 78 years old, his voice still carried the moral authority that had sustained Detroit's civil rights community through decades of struggle and progress. Kevin Washington never got to see his grandmother that day. Reverend Wright told the assembled students' families and media representatives. But his memory has opened doors for all of you, has created opportunities that will ripple forward for generations. Sometimes the most powerful victories come not from what we achieve for ourselves, but from what we make possible for others. Among the scholarship recipients was Amira Hassan, a 17-year-old refugee from Somalia whose dream was to become an airline pilot. Her acceptance speech brought tears to Jonathan's eyes as she spoke about learning that skin color and economic background didn't determine who could soar above the clouds. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice strong despite her nervousness, "you showed the world that dignity cannot be downgraded, that respect is not determined by seat assignments. Because of you, because of Kevin's memory, I know that my uniform will be measured by my skills, not my appearance." Also, among the recipients was Marcus Johnson, whose great-grandfather had been one of the Tuskegee Airmen, but who had grown up believing that aviation careers were reserved for people who looked different than him. "The Kevin Washington Foundation didn't just give me money for school," he said. "It gave me permission to dream beyond the limitations other people tried to place on me." The foundation's impact extended beyond individual scholarships. Major airlines, terrified of becoming the next SkyLink Airways, were partnering with the foundation to create mentorship programs, internships, and career development opportunities specifically designed to increase diversity in aviation and transportation industries. Sofia Martinez had watched the scholarship ceremony on television from her small apartment in Queens, where she was working as a customer service representative for a medical equipment company. The past 6 months had been a journey through professional exile and personal reflection, guided by court-mandated counseling sessions with Dr. Melissa Rodriguez, a therapist who specialized in helping people confront and overcome their unconscious biases. Sofia, Dr. Rodriguez, had said during one of their early sessions, "The hardest part of growth is acknowledging that good people can make terrible choices. You're not a monster, but your actions that day revealed assumptions and prejudices that you never examined." The therapy process had been painful but necessary, forcing Sophia to confront the ways that unconscious bias had influenced her decision-making throughout her career. She began to recognize the patterns, how she'd automatically assumed certain passengers were more credible than others, how she'd made judgments about who belonged in premium sections based on appearance rather than tickets, how she'd prioritized comfort over fairness in countless small decisions that added up to institutional discrimination. Her young daughter Isabella had asked the questions that cut deepest. Mommy, why did you hurt that man on the airplane? Why did you choose the mean man over the nice man? Sophia's answer had evolved over months of therapy. Because I made a terrible mistake, Mija. I let fear and assumptions guide my decisions instead of fairness and respect. I forgot that everyone deserves dignity, and I chose comfort over courage. But I'm learning to be better, to do better, because you deserve a mother who stands up for what's right. Richard Whitman's journey was taking a different path, one marked by public humiliation and private reckoning. His real estate empire had been reduced to a small property management company operating out of a strip mall office in Riverside. His wife had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and public embarrassment. His 3 adult children had changed their last names, unwilling to carry the burden of his choices. But perhaps most devastatingly, Richard was discovering that money couldn't purchase redemption, that privilege couldn't protect him from the consequences of his actions. The video of his racist demands had become part of the historical record archived in civil rights museums and played in corporate training sessions as an example of how entitlement could destroy lives and careers. His court-mandated community service at a homeless shelter in downtown Los Angeles had initially been approached with resentment and resistance. But gradually, through interactions with people who had lost everything, Richard began to understand something he'd never grasped before, that dignity was not earned through wealth or status, but was the birthright of every human being. Mr. Whitman said, Maria Santos, the volunteer coordinator at the shelter, I want you to understand something. These people you're serving, they have more dignity in their little fingers than you showed in that airplane seat. Dignity isn't about where you sit. It's about how you treat other people when you think nobody important is watching. The comment stung because it was true, and truth was something Richard had been avoiding for most of his life. His therapy sessions with Dr. Patricia Williams, a clinical psychologist who specialized in privilege and prejudice, were slowly helping him understand the difference between remorse and genuine change. Dr. Williams explained during one particularly difficult session, you're not sorry because you learned about consequences. You're sorry because you got caught. Real change means examining the beliefs and assumptions that led to your actions in the first place. That examination was proving to be the most difficult work of Richard's life, forcing him to confront the ways that privilege had insulated him from accountability for decades. Every interaction, every assumption, every casual cruelty that had once seemed natural now appeared as evidence of a moral blindness that had cost him everything. Meanwhile, Tommy Garcia had become something of a celebrity within the airline industry, invited to speak at conferences about customer service dignity and the courage required to stand up for what's right. His promotion to supervisor of customer experience training at SkyLink Airways had made him the youngest person ever to hold such a position, but his moral authority came from the moment he had chosen principles over politics. The most important lesson from Flight 1247, he told a gathering of airline executives in Miami, is that neutrality in the face of injustice is complicity. When we see discrimination happening, when we watch people being dehumanized, our silence becomes our statement. We have to choose sides, and the only moral choice is the side of human dignity. Captain Michael Torres had also found his voice in the aftermath of the incident, speaking publicly about the responsibility of leadership in moments of moral crisis. His testimony before a congressional subcommittee on transportation discrimination had been both powerful and painful, acknowledging his own failure to intervene earlier in the flight. "I had the authority to stop what was happening," he told the committee. "I had the power to correct the situation immediately. But I allowed it to continue because I didn't want to create a confrontation, didn't want to embarrass my crew, didn't want to disrupt the flight. I chose operational convenience over human dignity, and that choice makes me complicit in what happened." His testimony led to new Federal Aviation Administration regulations requiring airline captains to intervene immediately in any situation involving potential discrimination, with specific protocols for documenting and reporting such incidents. As Jonathan rose from Kevin's graveside, he felt something he hadn't experienced since he was 12 years old: peace. Not the fragile peace of avoiding conflict, but the deep peace that comes from knowing that justice had finally been served, that his best friend's memory had been honored, that no other child would have to carry the burden they had carried for 35 years. The road ahead was long, but it was no longer lonely. The Kevin Washington Foundation would ensure that opportunity was available to young people regardless of their background. The changes in aviation policy would protect passengers from the kind of discrimination they had experienced. The cultural shift in corporate America would make dignity and respect profitable rather than optional. Kevin Washington had never gotten to board that plane to Chicago, had never seen his beloved grandmother one last time. But his memory had finally taken flight, soaring above the clouds of prejudice and cruelty toward a future where everyone belonged, where everyone mattered, where everyone could claim their seat at the table of human dignity. 2 years after Flight 1247 became synonymous with the cost of casual cruelty, the transformation of American aviation was so complete that industry analysts spoke of a before and after moment that had redefined corporate culture across multiple sectors. The changes weren't merely cosmetic policy adjustments or public relations gestures. They represented a fundamental shift in how businesses understood the relationship between profit and principle. SkyLink Airways had emerged from near bankruptcy under the leadership of Carlos Mendoza, a Hispanic aviation executive whose first act as CEO was to implement what became known as the Carter Protocol, a comprehensive framework for ensuring that customer service decisions were based on policies rather than prejudices. The protocol required documented justification for any seat reassignment, mandatory bias training for all employees, and independent oversight of discrimination complaints. "We're not just rebuilding an airline," Mendoza explained during a press conference marking SkyLink's return to profitability. "We're rebuilding trust. We're proving that treating all customers with dignity isn't just morally right, it's economically essential." The Carter Protocol had been adopted voluntarily by every major airline in America, transforming industry standards in ways that federal regulations alone could never have achieved. The fear of becoming the next SkyLink Airways had motivated changes that decades of civil rights advocacy had struggled to accomplish. United Airlines reported a 47% decrease in discrimination complaints after implementing comprehensive bias training for all customer-facing employees. Delta's Dignity Initiative had become a model for corporate responsibility, with regular audits by independent civil rights organizations, ensuring that policies translated into practice. American Airlines had gone further, establishing partnerships with historically black colleges and universities to create pipeline programs for aviation careers, directly addressing the industry's lack of diversity at its source. Southwest Airlines had rewritten their customer service training manual to emphasize that courtesy and respect were non-negotiable aspects of every interaction. But the changes extended far beyond aviation. Hotels, restaurants, retail chains, and even corporate offices had implemented their own versions of anti-discrimination protocols, recognizing that the digital age made every customer interaction potentially viral, every discriminatory act potentially catastrophic. Nova Meridian Holdings had evolved from a traditional private equity firm into something unprecedented, a dignity-driven investment company that made anti-discrimination policies a requirement for any acquisition or partnership. Jonathan's investment philosophy had proven that companies with strong ethical foundations consistently outperformed those that prioritized profits over principles. Discrimination is bad business, Jonathan explained during his keynote address at the annual Corporate Social Responsibility Summit. It drives away customers, demoralizes employees, and creates legal liability that can destroy shareholder value overnight. Companies that embrace dignity and respect don't just do good, they do well. The Nova Meridian portfolio had grown to include transportation companies, hospitality chains, and technology firms that shared a commitment to treating all stakeholders with respect. The investment returns had been exceptional, proving that ethical business practices and financial success were not only compatible but complementary. The Kevin Washington Foundation had become a national model for educational opportunity and social justice. Beyond the initial 50 scholarships, the foundation had expanded to support over 500 students annually with partner programs in 12 states and international expansion planned for the following year. More importantly, the foundation's graduates were beginning to transform their industries from within. Amira Hassan had become the youngest African refugee ever accepted to the Air Force Academy, where she was training to become a military pilot before transitioning to commercial aviation. Marcus Johnson had been hired as an engineering intern at Boeing, working on next-generation aircraft design while mentoring other students from underserved communities. The ripple effects extended to unexpected places. Dr. Melissa Rodriguez had seen her practice grow exponentially as corporations sought bias training for their executives. Her book, Unconscious Discrimination in the Digital Age, had become required reading in business schools across the country. What Flight 1247 taught us, Dr. Rodriguez explained during a CNN interview, is that discrimination in the modern era isn't always intentional or malicious. Often it's unconscious automatic, based on assumptions we've never examined. The scariest part is that good people can make terrible decisions when they're operating on autopilot. Her therapeutic approach had been adopted by corporations seeking to address bias before it became crisis, recognizing that prevention was far more cost-effective than damage control after viral videos destroyed reputations and market value. Elena Rodriguez had leveraged her live stream documentation into a career as a civil rights attorney and social media advocate. Her law firm specialized in discrimination cases using the power of digital documentation to hold institutions accountable for their actions. The Elena Protocol, real-time documentation of discriminatory behavior, had become a powerful tool for justice in the smartphone era. Technology has democratized accountability, Elena said during her TED Talk on digital activism. Every person with a phone is potentially a civil rights documentarian. Every discriminatory act is potentially evidence in a court of law. The powerful can no longer hide behind closed doors or corporate PR departments. Miranda Jones had written a best-selling book about her experience on Flight 1247 titled The Seat That Changed America, a first-hand account of dignity discrimination and the cost of conscience. The book had been optioned for a major motion picture with proceeds going to fund civil rights education programs in public schools. Her travel journalism had evolved to focus specifically on diversity and inclusion in the hospitality industry, creating accountability through publicity and recognition through awards for companies that demonstrated genuine commitment to equal treatment. Richard Whitman's journey toward redemption had been slow, painful, and intensely public. His community service had evolved into volunteer work at the homeless shelter where he'd gradually learned to see dignity in places he'd never imagined. His therapy sessions with Dr. Patricia Williams had helped him understand that privilege wasn't something to be ashamed of, but something to be used responsibly. "I can't undo what I did on that airplane," Richard said during a rare television interview on the second anniversary of the incident. "I can't take back the words that cost so many people so much pain and money. But I can spend the rest of my life trying to make amends, trying to become the man I should have been all along." His ex-wife had grudgingly acknowledged his efforts at personal change, allowing him supervised visits with his grandchildren. visits that had become powerful motivation for continued growth. His real estate company remained small, but it now specialized in affordable housing development, using his industry knowledge to create opportunities rather than exclude them. Sofia Martinez had completed her therapy and begun working as a diversity trainer for customer service companies, using her experience as a cautionary tale about the cost of unconscious bias. Her presentations to corporate audiences were particularly powerful because she could speak from the perspective of someone whose career had been destroyed by a single discriminatory decision. "I wasn't trying to be racist," she explained to a group of airline executives during a training session. "I thought I was providing excellent customer service. But I had never examined my assumptions about who deserved respect, who belonged in premium spaces, who was credible versus who was suspicious. My unconscious biases made the decision for me, and the consequences were devastating for everyone involved." Her daughter Isabella, now 10 years old, had become her greatest teacher about the simplicity of treating all people with dignity. Mommy Isabella had said one day while watching her mother prepare for a diversity training presentation, "Why do grown-ups have to learn what kids already know? That being nice to people isn't hard." Tommy Garcia had been promoted to Director of Customer Experience for SkyLink Airways, making him one of the youngest executives in airline history. His leadership had helped transform the company's culture, creating an environment where employees felt empowered to prioritize dignity over convenience, fairness over comfort. "The most important thing I learned from Flight 1047, Tommy said during a panel discussion at the International Aviation Customer Service Conference, is that neutrality in the face of injustice is complicity. When we see discrimination happening, we have a choice. We can be part of the problem or part of the solution. There's no middle ground when it comes to human dignity." Captain Michael Torres had become an advocate for ethical leadership in aviation, speaking at pilot training programs about the responsibility that comes with command authority. His testimony before Congress had led to new FAA regulations requiring immediate intervention in discrimination situations with specific protocols for documenting and reporting such incidents. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural rather than institutional. The phrase Flight 1-47 moment had entered the American lexicon as shorthand for the instant when casual cruelty meets digital accountability, when unconscious bias collides with conscious consequence, when the comfortable assumption that nobody important is watching is shattered by the reality that everyone is always watching. Business schools taught case studies about the incident examining how individual actions could create massive consequences, how corporate culture was built through millions of small decisions, how the cost of discrimination far exceeded any possible benefit. Law schools used Elena's documentation as an example of how technology had changed the landscape of civil rights enforcement. High schools across the country showed edited versions of the incident as part of their civics and social studies curricula, sparking discussions about dignity, respect, and the responsibility that comes with privilege. Students wrote essays about what they would have done in that situation, creating a generation more conscious of bias and more committed to justice. Religious organizations used the story as a modern parable about compassion and moral courage, examining how individual choices reflected deeper spiritual values. Community organizations built programs around the themes of dignity and respect, using the Kevin Washington Foundation as a model for transforming tragedy into opportunity. International observers noted that the incident had become a defining moment in American corporate culture, demonstrating both the persistence of racial bias and the power of accountability to drive meaningful change. Business leaders from other countries studied the American response, implementing similar protocols in their own organizations. The transformation was incomplete, of course. Discrimination didn't disappear overnight, and the work of building more equitable institutions continued daily in boardrooms and classrooms, on airplanes and in hotels, wherever human beings made choices about how to treat other human beings. But something fundamental had shifted. The comfortable assumption that small acts of cruelty would go unnoticed had been shattered. The belief that economic power could insulate people from the consequences of moral failure had been proven false. The idea that dignity was negotiable had been rejected by a society that finally understood the true cost of casual cruelty. Flight 1247 had landed, but its passengers were still in flight, carried forward by the momentum of change, soaring toward a future where everyone belonged, where everyone mattered, where the color of someone's skin or the size of their bank account would never again determine whether they deserved a seat at the table of human dignity. 5 years after the most expensive flight in aviation history, Jonathan Carter walked through JFK Terminal 4 with his daughter Jasmine, now 24, and fresh from her graduation from Stanford Law School. They were boarding the exact same route SkyLink Airways Flight 1247 LAX to JFK, not because they had to, but because they wanted to witness how completely the world could change. The terminal buzzed with the familiar energy of travelers pursuing their destinations, but something felt different. The customer service representatives moved with a careful attention to dignity that hadn't existed before. Gate agents double-checked seating assignments with scrupulous fairness. Flight attendants greeted every passenger with genuine respect regardless of their appearance or destination. Dad Jasmine said as they approached Gate C7, "Are you nervous about flying this route again?" Jonathan smiled, his hand briefly touching the worn photograph in his wallet. Kevin at 11, gap-toothed and grinning forever frozen in innocent joy. "No, sweetheart. I'm grateful. Sometimes the most painful experiences become the most meaningful ones." They were welcomed aboard by Isabella Cruz, a young Hispanic flight attendant whose name badge bore a small pin featuring the Kevin Washington Foundation logo, a symbol worn by thousands of aviation employees who had completed dignity training and committed to treating every passenger with respect. "Welcome aboard, Flight 1247. Isabella said warmly, her smile genuine and unforced. "It's an honor to have you flying with us today, Mr. Carter." But what made Jonathan's heart swell wasn't the recognition. It was the fact that Isabella greeted every passenger with the same warmth, the same respect, the same assumption of dignity regardless of their appearance, age, or seat assignment. The young mother traveling alone with 3 children received the same courtesy as the business executive in the expensive suit. The elderly man with the worn carry-on bag was treated with the same respect as the tech entrepreneur with designer luggage. As they settled into their seats, Jasmine in 1A, Jonathan in 1B, a commotion arose near the back of first class. A well-dressed passenger was demanding that a young black college student move from his assigned seat, claiming priority based on frequent flyer status. Isabella approached the situation with the calm authority of someone trained in the Carter Protocol. "Sir," she said politely but firmly to the demanding passenger, "all seats are assigned based on valid tickets. There are no exceptions for seat reassignment based on passenger preferences. Do you know who I am?" The man sputtered, his voice carrying the familiar tone of entitlement that once ruled airline cabins. "I know you're a passenger with a valid ticket to seat 3C, Isabella replied. "Just like this gentleman has a valid ticket to seat 1F. Both tickets will be honored exactly as purchased." The demanding passenger looked around the cabin, perhaps expecting support from other travelers, but found only faces that reflected a simple truth. His anger was his alone. His entitlement outdated his assumptions about hierarchy, irrelevant in a world that had finally learned the cost of casual cruelty. He took his assigned seat without another word. Jonathan watched the interaction with quiet satisfaction, but his real joy came from observing Jasmine's reaction. Her generation had never known a world where discrimination was acceptable customer service policy. To her, Isabella's response wasn't remarkable, it was simply how civilized people behaved. "That's what normal looks like now, Dad," Jasmine said quietly. "People treating each other with basic respect. It shouldn't be revolutionary, but I guess it was." As the plane taxied for takeoff, Jonathan pulled out his phone and scrolled to a message from Sarah Mitchell, now CEO of Nova Meridian Holdings, following Jonathan's transition to Chairman Kevin Washington, scholarship recipients, now total 847 students across 15 countries. Last quarter's graduates include 12 pilots, 8 airline executives, 23 customer service managers, and 47 engineers. Kevin's legacy continues to soar. During the flight, Isabella approached with a special announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're honored to have someone very special aboard today. 5 years ago, this flight route became the catalyst for positive change throughout our industry, Mr. Jonathan Carter, through his courage and dignity, helped transform how airlines treat all passengers. The Kevin Washington Foundation, established in honor of his childhood friend, has now provided opportunities for thousands of young people to pursue their dreams in aviation and beyond." The cabin erupted in sustained applause, not for celebrity but for principle, not for wealth but for worth, not for status but for service to something greater than oneself. As they flew over the American landscape below, Jonathan reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Kevin Washington never did get to see his grandmother that final time, never grew up to fulfill his own dreams of flying. But his memory had taken flight in ways that 12-year-old boy could never have imagined. The airlines that once excluded now included. The corporations that once discriminated now celebrated diversity. The society that once accepted casual cruelty now demanded conscious compassion. And somewhere in the vast sky between Los Angeles and New York, the spirit of a boy whose dreams were torn apart had been restored, rebuilt, and released to soar forever. "Do you think Kevin would be proud?" Jasmine asked, understanding without words that her father's thoughts had turned to his lost friend. Jonathan looked out the window at the endless blue sky, the same sky that Kevin had dreamed of flying through so many years ago. "I think Kevin is finally flying first class, sweetheart, and I think he's making sure there's room for everyone." As Flight 1247 descended toward JFK Airport, completing a journey that had taken 5 years and transformed an industry, Jonathan Carter wasn't just a passenger anymore. He was proof that sometimes the most important destinations aren't places you travel to, but the person you become along the way. The plane touched down gently, its wheels meeting the runway with barely a bump. But the real landing had happened years ago, when dignity finally found its proper place in the world. Not as a privilege to be earned, but as a birthright to be honored. Not as a luxury to be purchased, but as a foundation to be protected. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it just whispers, "Welcome aboard. Your seat is ready. You belong here." Jonathan didn't just reclaim his seat, he reclaimed dignity for all of us. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that one person can change everything, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you believe respect should never be upgraded or downgraded. And comment, "Dignity matters." If you're ready to stand up when you see injustice, because the next time someone is told they don't belong, you'll know exactly what to do. Share this story because everyone deserves to know that their voice matters. Hit that like button if you believe in justice. Subscribe for more stories that prove change is possible when good people refuse to stay silent. And remember, dignity isn't negotiable. Respect costs nothing. And sometimes the most important flight is the journey toward becoming who we're meant to be. Thank you for watching, and remember your story matters too.